So, hi. Bonjour. Welcome. This is the keynote or plenary event for this week's Borders in the Americas conference, right, that's been going on yesterday and today. My name is Mike Foley. I teach American history here at UGA. This is Shepard Fairey. I guess he doesn't really... He doesn't really need an introduction, probably, but I'll give him a brief introduction in a minute. I want to just say a few things at the beginning, a few thank yous and a few logistical things at the start, because I've been in France only for a couple of years, but one of the things that I noticed is that the French are very, very polite. They like to thank people a lot, right? Like, I don't know if you've noticed this at French events, but sometimes it can take like 20 minutes just to thank people at the beginning of an event. So I'm going to try to do like an American version of that and condense it down to a few minutes. But I do have a small list of people who I would really like to thank, especially my colleagues who've been organizing this conference here, Pierre-Alexandre and Gregory Benedetti, Anne-Laure Amelia Zari, and Eric Tabuteau, who I have not yet met. Merci. Also, our lab, Ilse Akat, our directors, co-directors, Francois Genton and Suzanne Berthier, are constantly supportive. And most importantly, the administrators, Uria Manzouri, Sarah Arab Gauthier, and Abiba Naili, who helped me with the publicity. Basma, where's Basma? Jubari to QF. There she is, walking in the door, perfectly timed. Helped me with promoting the event as well. Everybody at Space Junk Art Centers and the Street Art Festival. Iñaki, Valentin, I see you in the back. Amandine, Geraldine, Julie, many other people. Especially my partner in crime in the back, Jérôme Katz, who is the founder of Space Junk, the founder of the Street Art Festival, my co-conspirator in bringing Shepard to Grenoble at last. And David Leishman, my colleague and friend, who's helped me a lot with the logistics today. I'm sure that was not very très français, huh? And I'm sure I'm leaving some people out, but I apologize for that. Finally, the last bit is that we're gonna talk today about street art and urban borders, right, in the Americas, and there'll be some time for a question and answer at the end, but we're somewhat short on time, and as you know, there will be other events at which Shepard will be appearing. So just two things along those lines is I'd like to encourage questions, of course, but particularly related to this theme, right, as it speaks to the themes of the conference, and keeps us more on time and running more efficiently, right? Like, there'll be other opportunities to ask him where he buys his paint and whether or not he knows Banksy or something like that. These are, like, I guess, the kind of questions you get, yeah. So we'll stick to that, right? To stick to street art and urban borders, if that's okay. All right? Ça va? It's good? Okay, merci. Yeah. Thank you. So one other thing about the questions, I forgot. The thing we're going to do is we distributed some little bits of paper so that if you have a question, the easiest thing to do is to write it down and to alert Leah here, or Pierre-Louis, là-bas, there, who will collect them, right, throughout the talk. So maybe just pass them down to the end, and then we'll have a couple of expert panelists over here who will pick a handful of questions, because we're not going to have time for more than 4 or 5. But we'll do our best to answer as many, or ask and answer as many as possible. Okay? Okay. So, Shepard. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Grenoble. I'd like to say a few things about Shepard's biography, although I think probably most of you know it. But if you don't know it, he's a bit of a migrant himself, right? He grew up in the south of the United States in Charleston, South Carolina. He migrated to New England for art school at the Rhode Island School of Design, where he first came up with the Andre the Giant Has a Posse sticker and stencil, which led to the Obey campaign, which led him to migrate and cross borders all over the country and all over the world, and increasingly became regarded as a political artist. It was political from the start, of course, coming out of kind of punk sensibility and a punk politics sensibility, but especially in the war years, in the George W. Bush years, that his art became much more kind of overtly political and topical about specific issues. Of course, he was already quite well known and highly regarded before 2007, 2008, but when the Obama Hope poster came out, then I guess that changed things for you in some ways. Yeah. So one of the things that I was going to say, just by way of context, is that when I got this job, or when I knew I was going to move to Grenoble, I would tell all of my friends, my American friends, that I was moving to Grenoble, and most of them went, "What?" and looked at me like a dog looks at a television screen sometimes. Like they didn't know where it was. Some of them would go, "Wait, isn't that in Switzerland?" And I was like, no. Like Americans, as you may have noticed, are not so great on geography anymore. But one of the only people who did know where Grenoble was Shepard, because Andre the Giant had always billed himself as a professional wrestler as the mountain man of Grenoble, right? So you win the geography prize.
But it was a lie.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a lie, it turns out. Jerome finally pinned it down that in fact Andrei Roussimoff was born outside of Paris. He was not the mountain man from Grenoble, but we don't care.
Yeah, or Trump would call it, what, exaggerated hyperbole?
Exactly, which is okay.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So it's very, it's really wonderful to have you here in Grenoble. We've been planning this for a long time. And I just wanted to, since we're talking about migrations and about crossing borders, is talk to you a little bit about the start of your work in Providence, for example, or elsewhere, but whether you thought about the kind of work that you were doing and the role that street art played in an urban setting where you have kind of formal and informal borders, right? Yeah. Established by different groups of people and transgressed by different groups of people, right? And whether at the time, in, say, the 1980s and 1990s, you were thinking about your work in those terms.
Well, it was not exactly borders in a more literal sense, but barriers. So street art, what excited me about it was that it was saying, I know that I don't have the clout, the power, the resources to use public space the way corporations do. I know I've been told that this is to be a one-way conversation, but I'm actually going to make it a two-way conversation. So it was about breaking down that barrier of who has a right to communicate in public space and who doesn't. Of course, from a subcultural standpoint, the idea of putting things out there that I knew would make other mischievous punk rock, skateboarder, do-it-yourself types intrigued, that it was sort of speaking a language that connected with them. So it was about both breaking down the barriers that the dominant culture tries to create, and also letting the subcultural people know, hey, I'm here, let's get together.
Right. And then within a city like Providence, where RISD's, the Rhode Island School of Design, is up on this hill, right?
Yep,
it's
it is.
Kind of in a privileged position. Was there a sense that, because normally now we think about American cities in the 80s and 90s, and we associate it with this kind of now overly used term of neoliberal housing policy, real estate policy, politics, right? Urban politics. Was there a sense that you were kind of descending out of like a particular kind of community and doing work in other parts of the community?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Providence is that it's got Brown University,
Right.
and Rhode Island School of Design and several other colleges, and there's the area where the school is called College Hill. My apartment was sort of on the backside of College Hill, but there's a lot of working class and poorer neighborhoods in Providence, and I became friends with a lot of the locals because I was serious about skateboarding, so I was finding all the locals that skateboarded, and a lot of them were from not the sort of preppy neighborhoods, but in fact, where RISD and Brown are is more the exception than the rule for Providence. But I come from a middle class background, but I always felt like I wanted to get away from the country club kids. Mm-hmm. I found that world to be too elite, too sheltered, too disrespectful of the struggles of other people. And these aren't things that I would have framed in the same way, with sort of the some of the intellectual jargon that's used now. It was more just a feeling I had, and so I got a studio while I was still a student off campus in Providence, in an area called Olneyville, in an old mill warehouse space that there was a shooting in the parking lot. I got to work to unpack my T-shirts and take them up to my studio, and they were picking up shell casings out of the parking lot. But for me, the thing that appealed about graffiti, street art, punk rock, skateboarding, were all that those things were not. They weren't about class. They were about the courage to participate, and there was a rebellious, transgressive side to almost all of those things, which was not, that was not good for your prep school resume, and I do appreciate the education I got at RISD, and I appreciate the things that my parents provided for me, but I'm also really grateful that for whatever reason, I was always motivated to be outside of that, to look outside of that bubble.
Right.
Punk rock was a big factor.
Right. Maybe could you talk a little bit more about that, perhaps? Because so it's interesting to me about the way you describe this community that you get to become part of in Providence, for example, right? And that are working class kids that are also bombing and skateboarding and stuff like that, right? Because the usual narrative about the origins of graffiti are like coming out of the Bronx, right? It's very interesting because it talks about, scholars sort of describe it as street artists, graffiti artists, establishing borders and transgressing borders all at the same time, right? That in the one way, it's a way of kind of letting the world know that you're there at a time when those communities are being neglected by the officials at City Hall, right, and elsewhere. And I wonder if that was similar for these same types of people that you're working with in Providence at the time.
Definitely. I think the impulse is very similar. I mean, even though it might seem like me getting into graffiti and street art was part of going to art school, it was in some ways. In other ways, it was actually going in a very different direction than art school. Art school was saying, here's how to build a professional resume to either get illustration work or design work, or to show your slides to a gallery and get a gallery show. I found a lot of the art world and professional design world side of things to feel very, very stuffy, and while I was dealing with that and accepting that I had to become an adult who could make a living at some point, there was a side of me that was and still is very rebellious about conforming to any sort of a commercial structure just because that's what you're supposed to do. And when we took a trip from Providence to New York City to go to the Met, when we were driving into the city, I saw all the graffiti, and it was getting more daring and more dense as you went into the city. As you're going through the Bronx, it's all along the freeway. As you go into the city, it's everywhere, and at least it was back in 1988, and it's a lot cleaner now.
Yeah.
New York City. But what moved me about it was, okay, I can read that name, that graffiti name. I can see the style of that, but I have no idea who that is. It's intentionally anonymous. And yet it's saying I exist and I won't be told where I can demonstrate that I exist. And to me that, that was something that I related to, and I thought, I want to do something like that, but I actually want it to be more than just me putting my name up.
Right.
And so graffiti was very influential for me. I loved the idea that it wasn't about making money or even getting fame for you yourself, that you could sit back and enjoy the fame of your name without it being even connected to you. So you're one step removed from it. And I thought that was there's a degree of ego involved, but there's also a detachment from the way ego usually manifests, and so I liked that aspect of it as well. But the also that race, class, none of that is something that you can say adds or detracts when you don't know who the person is doing it. Right. It becomes a non-factor. So I liked that you could imagine anyone doing it. It's so the open-endedness of it was very cool to me.
Right. And then as your kind of Obey campaign progresses, right, in the 1990s, because you're very well known for being relentless in plastering it in cities all over the world. Is this something that figured in your thinking when you were choosing locations? Like we were just talking about Philadelphia, and you said that you hit all these different neighborhoods. And then were you making decisions based on your understanding of the neighborhoods and the kind of character of the neighborhoods and the people who live there? Or how did you do that?
I'd say I was pretty, I just wanted to go all city. Uh-huh. And you were talking about graffiti artists eroding barriers and creating barriers simultaneously. I was never territorial with my work. The way I looked at it was, I don't need to create rivalries with other artists doing things on the street when I feel like philosophically they're probably people I have more in common with, and that we have common enemies in the forces of oppression out there, whether it's the cops or the wealthy and powerful who want to subjugate everyone else. Like, those are my enemies, not the other artists. So I always looked at putting my work in places that I could stand behind. And early on, I did a lot of things over ads, because I was like, your ad is not the best thing for my visual horizon. And if you want to force me to look at it, I'll at least say something back. Right. I kind of changed my mind about that later on, because I started to, as a graphic designer, work with people who were from companies like Levi's or wherever, and I realized that a lot of these people are good people, and then when I do something over their ad, somebody's got to go fix it, and right. I can say things about capitalism without doing it in that way. And so I decided that I would still express my disapproval of some aspects of advertising and capitalism, but not by just vandalizing advertisements.
Right.
But yeah, mostly I was putting my work in places that I felt was easy to justify as, a taxpayer, like any taxpayer who owns a little bit of the public space. And when it came to private spaces that were boarded up, dilapidated, I would put stuff there because I felt like it wasn't harming something. But I would never put my work over other artists' work.
Right.
I always respected other artists.
Right.
And a lot of people that went over me would start the rumors like, yeah, that guy doesn't respect graffiti. He goes over graffiti, which was a lie to try to justify them coming at me, because there's a lot of egos and jealousy and all that. But I just, if somebody did something over me, I just did something higher up. I just brought my fold-up ladder and went higher up, and usually they were too lazy to get a ladder. So, I would just, they would just look dumb, and I would win anyway without going over them.
Right.
So.
And you made me think about, in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a controversy about some of the liquor companies. For example, like Hennessy, I remember, got into a lot of trouble for always targeting the black community, right? And then I would imagine if you had if you'd hit a billboard like that, it'd be quite welcome in a community like that.
Yeah.
Did you get much in the way of feedback or the reception of the people in the community to you hitting billboards like that, this kind of advertising it's exactly what the Obey campaign's about, right?
Yeah.
It's about directing it at a particular group of people.
Well, I have gotten feedback from all sorts of different people, and listening to Public Enemy and Chuck D's talking about the pervasiveness of malt liquor ads in the in black neighborhoods. It was something that I thought about, but I also, even though I've done imagery around racial equality and championing some of some of my heroes that have happen to be black, like Angela Davis or Bobby Seale, I never was specifically going in thinking, okay, I'm gonna take out this malt liquor ad because I know the people in this neighborhood will respond well to it. And I don't think that the concept of it being inappropriate to try to be a white savior was really like sort of on the cultural radar at that point. Right. But for me, the idea that I was going to be some sort of paternalist for other groups has always been a little bit uncomfortable. I did become more direct with a lot of my messages once Bush was elected, because I felt like a lot of people were censoring themselves when Bush said, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And right. I said, no, it's not binary like that. There's a lot of gray area, and I need to speak out because I need to demonstrate that this shouldn't be a one-sided conversation where only the people that want to go to war and want to be nationalists are the ones doing the talking, because everyone else is afraid to be seen as sympathetic to the terrorists. Right. But we've talked about how I make images, and sometimes they're in collaboration with specific activist groups. Right. And sometimes I make an image and then an activist group will approach me and say, we like that image, it works for our cause, can we use it also? And I'm great with that, but I other than changing around OK Sodas, which a lot of people don't know, never heard of OK Soda, but you've all heard of Coca-Cola. In the mid-90s, Coca-Cola created a product, and this was called OK Soda, and this was post grunge becoming really successful, and the idea that things that were slick and mainstream and pop were not appealing to young people, and that being overpromised to and underdelivered to was making younger people jaded. So you might as well give them something that is the opposite of that. Say, it's not great soda, it's just okay soda. But when I saw that, and they hired people like Dan Clowes, the underground comic book artist, to do the graphics, that more than any traditional Coke marketing made me angry because it was presenting itself as something it wasn't. And so I did attack that campaign. I changed it around in the subways in Boston, on the streets of Boston, streets of Providence. It was only test marketed in a few cities. But that was me saying, fuck you to Coke, and then also saying to the other people that I thought were, like-minded, coming from this more do-it-yourself culture that this product was trying to look like, hey, I'm fighting for who we are. This right. That's one of the only times I've gotten really territorial, and I don't know if I would react the same way now. But at the time, it felt like, okay, just finally, all the things that I've had to fight for in the margins for years are seeing some wider embrace. And I'm not handing this off to you, Coke. You don't get to take this.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, I still feel that way about some things, but I was really pissed off about it then.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about, so we talked also a little bit about this before, but as an artist based in Los Angeles now, right, in Southern California, in the midst of this crisis over immigration with the current president, I'm interested in what your experience has been like as a street artist making art near the border or on the border. Yeah. What you see is the role of street art on the border. If it makes a difference to make it in El Paso or San Diego compared to New York or Philadelphia or something like that. Any of your thoughts about that? Because it seems like the last year when I was the last 2 times I've been in California, this migrant crisis has been the dominant story. Mm-hmm. And it seems like there's an opportunity for street artists to play a role. But maybe you could say more about that.
Well, I've been making images dealing with immigration since 2009. In 2009, I collaborated with my friend Ernesto Urena, who is from El Centro. His parents are Mexican. And we were also working with Zach De La Rocha from Rage Against the Machine. And we did some images that were sort of riffing off of a lot of the civil rights posters that said, I'm a man, but they say the posters say we are human, and it's only gotten worse. But I've changed my strategy slightly. I did do. I'm trying to make the images. I think the We Are Human campaign was pretty positive, but there was like a kid with his fist in the air. It has a little bit of like brown power attitude to it, and what I've realized in this time of extreme division in the United States is that it's actually more punk rock, I think, to go with something that's more universal and inclusive than to just shore up the divisions that exist. And I think it's more subversive. So my approach is to create portraits of people who are undeniably appealing and have, imbued with humanity. And then the text is basically, whether it's the Defend Dignity piece I did for the Women's March in 2017, or the Welcome Visitor piece that I did more recently, or Target Exceptions, which is about most people are exceptions to the criteria that will allow you to migrate to the United States. Right. And Vils and I collaborated on a piece called American Dreamers. Mm-hmm. I think that all of that work is really important to make, and I've been doing it in I've been doing pieces on walls in LA, Costa Mesa. I've done stuff in Tijuana and Ensenada before, but I don't, other than from a PR standpoint, I'm not sure whether doing something specifically on the border is moves the dial that much. But I do think that changing people's attitudes moves the dial about the border. I consider myself an American only by the fact that I was born there. It's not something I identify with. It's not my sports team.
Right.
It's I consider myself a world citizen, and I meet people all over the world that are great. That whatever country they're from, whatever ethnicity they are, that's not a factor to me at all. And I meet plenty of American assholes and plenty of assholes in other countries too.
Right.
So it's not. Nobody's got the monopoly on good people or bad people.
Right.
But I do, when I look at someone like Trump and many of the other people that are trying to really foster xenophobia, cultivate, really bad ideas, and try to get them to take hold with, pointing out things that are the exception, not the rule, such as crimes that immigrants have committed,
Right.
even though statistically they're a lot, their crime rates are much lower.
Right.
You can always find an exception that Fox News and Trump can point to as the rule. To counter that, making images that represent immigrants as equally worthy of being American and equally human has been the approach I've been taking. But I do love when someone like JR does his piece right at the border. I love what Banksy did in Palestine on the the wall there.
Right.
Those are strong pieces. I did a piece on a chunk of the Berlin Wall in LA, but but I did a Palestinian woman looking through a curtain as if she's looking through the wall.
Okay.
Because I see, parallels, these places where, there are walls to keep people out or hold people in. It's frequently driven by a lot of the same bad ideas and same policies. So, making the analogy from one to the other that they are, they are all sort of symptoms of the same bad ideas rather than isolated is something that I try to do with my work as well.
Right. So you weren't tempted when Trump made however many models of potential walls that he wanted to build. You weren't tempted to go hit some of those. I thought that was a good opportunity.
Yeah, it is actually something that I think would have been pretty great to sabotage. I know that Ron English is doing a project on the border. And he's got a lot of really funny copy that he's written and characters that he's created. But when I look at what he's doing, I think it's strong, fun work, and it's kind of, it's pretty punk in a sense. But I think it also is only it's going to be loved by the people that agree with him.
Right.
And I'm one of those people.
Right.
So I'm love it. But the people that disagree with him are going to say, look at the kinds of people who are, are disrespectful of the law, that are disrespectful of the people that have to, live on the border. I think there are ways to take the wind out of the sails of all those bad arguments, and
Right.
And so I'm always looking at the ways to diminish the wind, not add to the wind.
I see. Right.
Of
Okay.
pushing things in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And that's that's like the mature me now.
Right.
I still am angry and sometimes belligerent, but when it comes to strategies with my art, I'm trying to look at not what's safe, but what's effective.
Right.
Sometimes safe is not effective. Sometimes it is. So it's whether I'm going to be antagonistic or look at an opportunity, sort of a Trojan horse opportunity.
Right.
How am I going to get through the almost impenetrable wall of ignorance of much of the U.S. public?
Right.
I look at what the best approach is.
Yeah.
Speaking of barriers.
Speaking of barriers, the impenetrable
many mental barriers in the U.S.
Exactly. And then
But that's happening everywhere, right?
For sure.
Xenophobia is on the rise everywhere. It's on the rise here too.
Right.
Germany, England.
No, it's frightening.
Yeah.
So
Italy,
you've
Greece.
done art throughout the Americas, right? You've done.
No, I've actually. I've sent stuff to South America. I've actually never traveled to. I've been to Ecuador.
Right.
But I put a few stickers up. But I was on my way to the Galapagos with my family. We're all very concerned about what's happening with the environment ecologically, and we thought it would be a meaningful trip to go to the Galapagos, and so I've been there. But I love a lot of the artists from Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, but I've never done any shows there.
Okay.
But I really like a lot of the art that comes from South America.
Because I was going to ask if you feel like there's any kind of difference in the role that street art plays in cities in different parts of the Americas, right? And maybe that's not easy to answer.
Well, it's called Piche Cow, which is I think it started in Brazil, but it's become popular in a few places in South America. But it's very daring, sort of tall, almost hieroglyphic-like graffiti that a lot of poor kids in the favelas do. That has become kind of cool for more affluent kids to do as well. But it's to do it well, though, you have to be almost like a mountain climber, but doing it on buildings,
right.
And because it's not a difficult style of calligraphy, it's difficult to get to the spaces, and so that's a fascinating thing that I think maybe has a common impulse with a lot of the traditional tagging in the U.S., but is more hardcore,
right.
And I see in a lot of places whether it's South America or the U.S. or Mexico, places where people don't own property, where there is a large part of the population that is, why would they respect property when they've never owned property?
Right.
And so when people are complaining about graffiti, I say, well, let's look at the factors, and psychologically, when people feel powerless, and they'll do anything to demonstrate that they're not powerless, and when they don't own property, why would they respect property?
Right.
So let's maybe look at the conditions that create the desire to do something like that. And like I said, I grew up middle class, and I still had the desire to do stuff like that. Yeah. I think I'd be even more prolific and surly,
right?
If I'd grown up in a poor neighborhood,
right? This brings me to, this will be my last question, and we'll open it up to some questions. But we were talking yesterday about this question of, because it's kind of the opposite of what you just described, right? There's a critique of street art as kind of advancing the neoliberal agenda in some cases, particularly like in the commissioned piece we were talking about in New York, this image of Evelyn Nesbit that's just been kind of controversial and covered in the New York Times. But this idea that, street art now is being kind of co-opted and commodified by real estate interests, by city officials, right? There's even a little bit of graffiti outside of Space Junk about the street tourism festival, right? That was a little shot at Jerome, I think. And I wonder what you'd say about that, about this idea that street art, which comes from this tradition of really transgressing boundaries, right? Is now, some people say, is establishing boundaries, like saying that this is where some people can go, but not all people can go, making it kind of more of an elite neighborhood, more exclusive, available only to some people, which is the opposite of the folks you were just describing.
Yeah,
right?
well, it's amusing and in some ways frustrating to me that for the first 20 years of my career, I was considered a vandal.
Right.
And then I had about 3 years where I was maybe okay, but still arrested on the way into my museum show in Boston for being a vandal. And then it flipped over to now I'm part of the evil machine of gentrification.
Yeah.
So I was lowering the property values, and now I'm raising them.
Right.
But this just is a reflection of the true complexity of life and the social constructs under capitalism. It's I try to be. I look at first. Let's just talk about my main philosophy, which is that art should be more democratic. So putting art in public spaces, whether illegal or legal, to me was democratizing art and a way of me expressing my ideas and sharing it with people without the usual bureaucracy. Now that I took risks for all those years and have been arrested 18 times, and enough people like the stuff that I did without permission to say, hey, next time you don't have to do it while you look over your shoulder for the cops. Like, you can this is our property. You can stand here and paint it, and if cops come up, we'll say, no, we gave them permission. Mm-hmm. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Thanks. I can actually spend some more time and make this look decent. Now I'm in the position of people asking me all the time to paint murals, and I vet each, situation based on what I think the intention is. Now, I have been approached by some real estate people. I just did in Costa Mesa, California. I just did a pro immigrant piece on a new apartment complex. And the guys who run it, they said, yeah, we're doing things to green the building. We're trying to do things for the community. We have all these programs that we're doing. And I'm getting a piece that's pro-immigrant on the 405 freeway in right. Orange County, yeah. The most Republican part of the state of California. To me, that seemed worth it. Someone might say, oh, these guys doing this building here, that's going to raise the rents in the area, so, you suck. But I one of the ways I look at it is like when all the abuse cases came out in the Catholic Church, people didn't say, Michelangelo, how are you going to answer for this?
Right. Right.
Your thing on the Sistine Chapel made this seem like a safe space. Right. I look at it like I'm going to try to be sensitive to what I think the dynamics of the community are, but really it's up to the voters to put people in office that will make sure that developers and landlords are not exploiting opportunities that come with gentrification in a way that's brutal for the people on the lower end of the lower end of things economically. And this has been happening in LA, where people have been priced out of more expensive neighborhoods and moved their galleries further east of downtown into East LA, and then people throw red paint on the gallery. And I like when people are willing to protest, but some forms of protest I think are healthier than others. And when I look at this person should be at City Hall talking about policy rather than saying the people who are barely getting by financially. I can tell you, I'm an owner of a gallery, and we've been doing it for for many years, and it's never turned a profit. It's the only way I can keep doing it is because it's housed in the same building as my studio, so the overhead's absorbed.
Right.
Galleries are not the thing that come into a neighborhood and make a lot of money. But they might be the canary in the coal mine that lets the developers know this gallery survived. There's a coffee shop opening. Now it's time to build more condos and raise the rent.
Right.
So it's keeping that developer from being able to engage in predatory behavior, not punishing the artists, that I think is a more productive solution.
Right. Yeah, and that's a kind of age-old problem, as you say. It's not even about street art. It's about artists not intentionally being the canary in the coal mine, but going to a place where the rents are low, and then everyone else follows. Right?
And I've done that my whole life.
Sure.
And a lot of people that I'm friends with in LA who are Latino, who have move around. We have these discussions. I'm like, if I go there where your studio is, I'm in trouble because I'm white, but you're doing the same thing. You're a slightly more affluent Latino moving to a cheaper area, but you're going to be okay because and so I'm not. I understand how privileged I am being a white male, but there's some aspects of these politics that I think are very healthy and important conversations to have, and other things that are sort of identity politics gone awry.
Right. Okay.
But my default position is to side with anyone who's not gotten a fair shake.
Right.
So I'm willing to tolerate a good bit of abuse.
Right. Thank goodness for that. Do you have some questions you've collected? If you have other questions that haven't been collected, maybe raise your hand and people can come collect them. If that's all right. This is going to require reading glasses, I think. So here's a straightforward question. What are your thoughts on street art in rural areas? I've focused you entirely on cities, but so that's a good question about rural areas.
Well, I have been driving through Texas or on the way to Las Vegas, and there'll be a water silo out in the middle of a field, and that's awesome. I'm going to go hit that because it's already a human-made thing that's sort of standing out from the landscape, that I feel like me adding to it is not changing the dynamics of nature.
Right.
But when I see graffiti on a boulder, that makes me really angry.
Yeah.
Because I have an appreciation for nature. Yeah, a rock.
Right. A big rock.
Not a rock the country, but just a big rock. A rock. Yeah. But it's a friend of mine from North Carolina, this guy David Ellis, a.k.a. Squirm. He started this thing in North Carolina because he grew up in a rural area with a lot of tobacco barns that were, as tobacco farming started to fade, a lot of them were abandoned, and he started doing graffiti on them. And then he started inviting graffiti artists from all over the country, and he got a lot of the locals excited about graffiti on barns. And I can appreciate this sort of unexpected, surreal element in a rural setting. That's it's pretty exciting. So I'm down. I'm definitely down with that. But I don't carve tags in trees or stencil on rocks or anything like that.
Right. Do you feel like that kind of rural, like say on the side of tobacco barns, it plays the same role? The street art, the images have the same kind of political effect or importance of stuff that you see in cities?
I mean, I think that art in public space can capture the imagination because so I think it has a benefit almost anywhere. the idea that a lot of people feel powerless. They feel like, spectators in democracy, spectators in their own lives to a degree. That this a lot of these things are done by people who aren't virtuosos. That's one of the things I love about graffiti is that you can actually watch people progress over time, and there is no okay, you need to do this in isolation until you get approval, and then you can share it with an audience. You're learning in front of the public. Your triumphs and failures are all public.
Right.
But anything that would embolden people to express themselves, whether it's to create art or make music or write something or just use their voice in some way, I think has a benefit. And I come from a place that's not a cultural hotbed at all,
right.
Quite the opposite. And so I'm so glad that I was exposed to street art when I went up to Rhode Island and New York, and then also that I had already been exposed to punk rock in South Carolina, because those are things that are both about not about virtuosity, but just about the courage to get in the mix and participate.
Right.
And so I think that has value almost anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, good. Here's another question. With your emphasis on inclusiveness, or not just preaching to the choir, and in spite of the fact that your art is more important on a larger and less tangible scale, do you have a simple, concrete, and personal example of your street art changing someone's stance on otherness?
I mean, there are lots of examples of people sending me letters or emails or just telling me in person. But I remember in 2008 meeting a woman or actually it was early 2009 because it was right before the inauguration, before Obama's inauguration. A woman who was in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, and a group of artists, and we were doing a show called Manifest Hope, and it was art around the progressive issues that Obama had championed as a candidate. So workers' rights, universal health care, environmental responsibility, things like that. Not all of which he lived up to as president, but a woman came to that event and she found me and she said, so I'm from Florida, and one of my coworkers had one of your hope stickers in her cubicle, and I was intrigued by the image, and so I asked her, and she gave me Obama's some of his ideas, and then pointed me to his website, and then I looked at some of your other work. I was curious about you as the creator, and I'd been a lifelong Republican, but not particularly happy with George Bush, and I totally changed my mind about politics because your image prompted me to do a little bit of looking around.
Wow.
And there's nothing that could make me happier, and that's the aim of the majority of my images,
right.
is to create a conversation that wouldn't happen otherwise.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be by poking, and other times by seducing.
Right.
But Obama looking like he had vision and patriotism in red, white, and blue, and being graphically depicted in a flattering way. That's all it took to get her to ask some questions. And she said that after that, she started ordering the stickers and giving them out, and all of a sudden a ton of coworkers emerged after that one woman had the courage to put the sticker up in her cubicle, that half the cars in the parking lot at their square office job, whatever it was, where everybody works in cubicles, all were adorned with Obama stickers by the election time.
Right.
That is fucking phenomenal.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So
good. That's a good answer. Anlo, I saw you had a question, but I didn't receive it. But since you're a geographer, yeah.
I was wondering because
Thanks.
a lot of your murals are binary. It's images cut in two, or there's a cursor or something. So you recreate boundaries within your work. What is your stance on limits from an aesthetical point of view? How do these borders balance your pictures?
Well, so the question is the boundaries that I set up within my work. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether you're talking more about some of the recent pieces that have the rips and intentional borders from image to text. But a lot of the work that I've been doing, I've been using the aesthetic of an image on a wall that has a rip with some other image reading through as a way of giving me compartments to put sometimes multiple layers of a message and sometimes multiple sides of an argument in one piece. But the thing I like about the rips, other than just the aesthetics, because I've put posters on the street for so many years and people would rip at them, and sometimes I thought there was a charm to the fragmented image and being able to see what was underneath or something else added on top. It's also a metaphor for the competing territories, messages, people competing for ownership. So that, this all these layers and the way things accumulate, sometimes it's the person who wins is the person who's most persistent when it comes to the street. They put up a poster, add another poster, keep it going. But for me, it's a way of symbolizing the way that there are always different arguments, different conversations going on simultaneously, and so I can present what I think is the point of view that needs to be overcome in a section of a piece, while it's dominated by something that's the counter argument.
I think this is very much about borders that are palimpsest.
Yes.
Really dig into and see the past reappear.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The border of palimpsest of layers. I'm often using old newspaper clippings and articles, things that happened in the past that are repeating in a different package now, such as the Japanese internment in the U.S. during World War II, which was fueled by scapegoating, fear, xenophobia. The same thing with the Muslim ban. So I'm making an analogy between these two things, and the U.S. is now ashamed of the Japanese internment, and I hope we'll be ashamed very soon of the travel ban. But anything I can do to nudge that conversation along.
Great. I think maybe we'll do one last question, because then you've got to get moving to the next event. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. 2 more questions. Let's say 2. Yeah? All right. So this person asked, what does the word socialism mean to you in relation to crossing borders and barriers between classes and countries, for instance?
Whose question was that?
Right here.
Oh, right here. Cool. Socialism shouldn't be a bad word, like it is in the U.S. It's absurd. To me, just based on my understanding of human psychology, a blend of socialism and capitalism is the healthiest way for a system to work, such as what's going on in say Denmark. I mean, there's a blend of socialism and capitalism here in France, and everyone's going to have a different point of view about what the healthiest ratio is, but I think that the problem in the United States is that there's already a lot of socialism, but they don't call it that. So that your trash is taken away, that there are public roads and parks and public schools. That's socialism. There's also socialism that I think is really bad news, like subsidies for oil companies. I think socialism should help people who need help, not corporations that are already extremely profitable and are destroying the planet. The tariff is it's a tax. So it's, the idea that, well, who knows what that tax is going to be used for, but, this is all you could argue a facet of socialism. But, I look at how they measure happiness, and I don't know how they measure happiness. On paper, I should be really happy, yet I'm not all that happy. So I don't know, Scandinavians, maybe they're more happy, but the a little bit higher tax and good subsidies for education, any number of things, where it creates a smaller division between classes in terms of the basics that are needed in life. To me, that's the healthiest setup. I don't measure success by money. I measure it by quality of life. There are too many idiots that measure it by money. And that's really screwed up the U.S. system because, it just seems like the idea that money equals happiness is far too entrenched to get it through people's minds that more basic services and more equality actually would yield more happiness because people wouldn't feel as jealous. But, that's just my opinion, and a lot of people disagree. But I think that when I look at a lot of the Democratic candidates for president right now, a lot of them are leaning more towards that direction. But what they have to do in order to make it appeal and not seem scary, because socialism and communism have been so bad-mouthed through the years in the U.S., is they have to package it very carefully, and I find that really irritating. But I understand the stupidity of American politics.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Okay, cool.
Another question is, how do you choose your heroes / icons? Have you ever been disappointed with anyone you've depicted in your work?
Sure. I had my disappointments with Obama. Domestic spying, that he tried to defend that even though he didn't know how serious and deep it was.
Right.
Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden are heroes to me. They're not criminals. Obama, I think, is a very high quality human being. I've actually spent time with him a few times. Our family was invited to the White House the day we were invited, far in advance of it, but it turned out that it was the day after Trump got elected. And I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But right. Obama was he just proved what he's made of as a human being. That he really expressed that this might seem like the worst thing in the world, but that you can't look at it that way because that's demotivating, and that, progress is not a straight line, zigzags, setbacks, that Trump being elected is bad, but every action to push things in the right direction makes a difference, and just keep pushing. And that was the pep talk I needed to hear.
Right.
But I've never agreed with anyone on every single policy, But probably my biggest disappointment is with Aung San Suu Kyi from Burma, because she really has taken a stand. She, was on house arrest when she could have left and gone to England, and not been facing a really an oppressive situation for herself, but that she hasn't done more to push back against some of the human rights violations towards the Muslims in Burma is very, very disappointing. Now, the military junta still controls the government in Burma. She's really more of a figurative leader and a way of appeasing the rest of the world by giving her some symbolic power. But so she doesn't have real power to change it.
Right.
But I think speaking out always matters. And so when someone is in a position where they have a megaphone to the rest of the world and they don't speak out, I find that really, really disappointing.
Yeah.
So, some people have argued with me that she's got no power, and so she hasn't done anything wrong. And then other people have argued that she always just wanted to become someone with some power in Burma, and so now she's been corrupted by her ambition.
Right.
I think the truth is probably more in between.
Right. But it's the silence that's the problem.
Yeah, the silence is the problem.
Yeah.
I've met her. She's
Yeah.
an extraordinary speaker and a really warm human being, and somebody who's sacrificed a lot. But to sacrifice all that time and then not use, once you're in a position to be outspoken within the system rather than just outside the system, is very disappointing.
Right. Okay, I think we're at 6:15, so we have to wrap it up. I'd like to thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Thanks to Shepard Fairey. He's an extremely busy guy this week. Thanks to Jerome running him into the ground. But I'm really grateful that he took the time to come and spend this time with us. So thanks very much.